A primal roar tore from Ethan's throat, a sound born of sheer terror and desperate, unyielding will, as the inferno consumed the sleek black sedan before him. Flames, orange and furious, licked at the sky, casting grotesque shadows that danced in the scorching afternoon heat. Smoke, thick and acrid, clawed at his lungs, burning with every ragged breath, yet he pushed deeper, ignoring the searing pain, ignoring the primal instinct screaming at him to retreat. He saw her, a small pale face pressed against the rear window, a child trapped within the fiery tomb, and in that horrifying instant, time ceased to exist. Every fiber of his being was focused on one singular, desperate goal: to reach her, to pull her from the ravenous maw of the fire, just as he had failed to save another years ago. The memory, a persistent phantom limb of grief, propelled him forward, an axe clutched in his calloused hands, its weight a familiar, grounding presence amidst the chaos. He would break through. He had to. Just moments before, life had moved with the monotonous hum of routine, a deceptive calm that masked the constant, low thrum of sorrow residing deep within Ethan Miller's chest. The scorching afternoon sun beat down on Interstate 5, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage, an endless ribbon of concrete stretching through the heart of Seattle. His worn pickup truck, a loyal workhorse that had seen more sunrises than most people saw in a lifetime, wrestled through the usual relentless traffic. 38 years old, every one of those years etched into the lines around his eyes, Ethan carried the quiet weight of a life shaped by an unbearable loss. 8 years prior, his wife, Sarah, had died in what he believed was a tragic car accident, a cruel twist of fate that had ripped his world apart and left an unfillable void. The official report, a cold, clinical document, stated a single vehicle collision, a loss of control on a slick highway, and an unstoppable fire. Ethan had believed it. He had to. There was no other explanation his shattered heart could accept. Beside him, his 10-year-old son, Leo, was thankfully asleep, head lolled against the window, utterly oblivious to the silent battle his father waged daily. Leo's peaceful slumber was a small, precious reprieve from the constant struggle of making ends meet. Ethan was a construction worker, his hands toughened by years of wielding hammers, lifting beams, and shaping raw materials into something new. But even these hands, strong and capable, often felt helpless against the invisible weight of single fatherhood and the crushing grip of grief. His mind was miles away, planning dinner for Leo. A simple meal, perhaps spaghetti and meatballs, a favorite, mentally adding up grocery costs, calculating how many hours he'd need to work next week to cover the extra school supplies Leo would inevitably require. The mundane arithmetic was a welcome distraction from the deeper, more painful calculations of a life lived without Sarah. The world ahead of them erupted without warning, shattering the mundane into a million splintered pieces. A violent symphony of screeching tires tore through the air, followed by the sickening crunch of metal against concrete, and finally the terrifying crescendo of shattering glass. Ethan's head snapped up, his blood running cold. A sleek black luxury sedan, a model he'd only ever seen in magazines, its polished surface reflecting the merciless sun, had veered sharply. It clipped the guardrail with an almost casual brutality, spinning once, twice, before slamming to a halt. In a terrifying, instantaneous flash, the vehicle, now a twisted caricature of its former elegance, burst into roaring flames. A fiery blossom of destruction unfurled, consuming the car with a speed that defied comprehension. Ethan slammed on his brakes, the pickup skidding precariously, tires biting into the hot asphalt, sending up a cloud of dust and burnt rubber. His heart, already accustomed to a rhythm of quiet anguish, now hammered against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat. He hadn't thought, he had reacted. His firefighter training, buried under years of sorrow and civilian life, ignited within him like an old, familiar fire, demanding action. He was out of the truck before it had fully stopped, his door still swinging open. "Leo, stay here, lock the doors, don't you dare move," he shouted, his voice raw with an urgency that tolerated no questions, no hesitation. Leo, startled awake by the sudden lurch and his father's guttural command, blinked owlishly, confusion clouding his features, but he obeyed, a flicker of fear in his eyes. The heat was immediate, a tangible, oppressive wall that pushed Ethan back, stealing the air from his lungs. The acrid smell of burning plastic and gasoline clawed at his throat, a noxious assault that made his eyes water. Flames, vibrant and merciless, licked greedily at the sedan, transforming it into a fiery tomb. Thick black smoke billowed upwards, merging with the hazy orange sky of the sunset, creating a hellish tableau. Other cars had slowed, some stopping entirely, drivers emerging, their faces etched with shock and helplessness, but none dared approach the raging inferno. Ethan, however, could not be deterred. He stared, mesmerized by the destructive beauty, until his gaze cut through the distorted glass of the rear passenger window, and there it was, a small face, pale and terrified, pressed against the smoky pane, a child, a girl, no older than 7, trapped. A cold, agonizing spike of dread pierced through Ethan's chest, sharp and excruciating. His mind flashed to Sarah's accident, the helplessness, the consuming fire that had taken her from him. The vivid, horrifying images of that day, usually locked away in the deepest recesses of his memory, now surged forward, fresh and brutal. He wouldn't let that happen again. Not again. Not another innocent life, swallowed by the flames while he stood by. A desperate, protective instinct, one he thought had died with his wife, surged through him, powerful and undeniable. He raced back to his truck, his heavy work boots pounding on the asphalt, the ground vibrating beneath his feet. He wrenched open the tailgate, his hands fumbling for a moment, before finding the familiar cold steel. With a grunt of effort, he pulled a heavy axe from its mount in the bed, a tool usually reserved for demolition work, for tearing down what was old to make way for the new. Now, it would be a tool of salvation. He charged back into the inferno, the axe gripped tightly, its blade glinting ominously in the dancing firelight. The air crackled with intense heat, sparks showering his arms, stinging his skin, but he ignored the searing pain. Smoke blinded him, making his eyes water, but he kept his gaze fixed on the small face in the window, a beacon in the hellish haze. Each step felt like walking through solid resistance, a physical struggle against the heat and smoke, but he pressed on, fueled by a primal roar that now truly erupted from deep within his chest. It was not just a sound, but a release, a channeling of all the grief, all the helplessness, all the fury of 8 years of unspoken pain. He lifted the axe, the heavy tool a mere extension of his will. With every ounce of his strength he swung, aiming for the tempered glass. The first blow connected with a deafening crack, spiderwebbing across the window. He swung again and again, the glass groaning, resisting, then finally yielding with a violent shiver of fragmented shards. Reaching through the jagged opening, ignoring the razor-sharp edges that tore at his skin, he fumbled for the child. Her small body was stiff with terror, unmoving, unresponsive. "Hey, hey, little one," he rasped, his voice hoarse, his lungs burning. He found her, her soft hair brushing against his fingers, her small, trembling shoulder. He pulled, grunting with effort, the encroaching fire licking closer, the heat intensified by the broken window. He pulled again, his muscles screaming in protest, until her limp form was in his arms. She was so light, so fragile, a stark contrast to the destructive power around them. He shielded her face against his chest, tucking her small head beneath his chin, her small hands, surprisingly strong, clutching his smoke-stained shirt. He stumbled back, away from the car, away from the ravenous flames. Just as they cleared the immediate vicinity, the sedan exploded in a final, furious roar, showering the highway with molten debris and a shockwave that rattled his teeth. The force of it almost knocked him off his feet, but he held tight to the precious cargo in his arms. He collapsed on the shoulder of the road, the adrenaline slowly draining from his limbs, leaving him weak and trembling. He cradled the girl, his arms wrapped protectively around her. She was coughing violently now, her small body shaking uncontrollably against his, a fragile bird caught in a storm. Her face was smudged with soot, a dark mask that contrasted sharply with her wide, innocent eyes. They were a striking shade of blue, a deep, vivid color that stared up at him, a silent plea for safety, for comfort, for understanding. He tried to catch his breath, the air still thick with the metallic tang of smoke, his own lungs burning, but a profound sense of relief washed over him, momentarily eclipsing the exhaustion. She was safe. He had saved her. Just then, a second luxury vehicle, a sleek black SUV, screeched to a halt behind them, tires squealing in protest. The passenger door flew open, and a woman, impeccably dressed in a tailored business suit but with a face contorted in sheer panic, sprang out. This was Victoria Vance, 42 years old, the formidable CEO of Ethel Corp., a tech giant known for its cutting-edge innovations and ruthless efficiency. Her composure, usually unshakable, had completely shattered. She ran to them, her expensive heels clicking frantically on the asphalt, her relief palpable, raw tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. She dropped to her knees beside Ethan, her hands reaching out for the child with an almost desperate tenderness. Victoria gathered her daughter, Lily Vance, into a fierce embrace, burying her face in the child's sooty hair, whispering urgent words of comfort and love. Ethan, still catching his breath, watched the reunion, a pang of bittersweet longing aching in his chest. The raw, unfiltered emotion on Victoria's face was a stark reminder of his own lost connection, of a love that had been stolen too soon. He felt a phantom ache in his empty arms, a ghost of a child he had never held. Lily, still in shock but visibly calmed by her mother's touch, looked back at Ethan, her small hand reaching out to touch his smoke-stained cheek. Her fingers, delicate and small, felt strangely familiar against his skin. She stared at him, her striking blue eyes, wide and searching, holding a depth that seemed far beyond her years. The world held its breath, suspended in that tense, silent moment. The chaos of the highway slowly dissipated, the searing heat and acrid smoke fading into the sterile, unforgiving quiet of Seattle Presbyterian Hospital. Emergency vehicles, their sirens now muted, had whisked Lily and Victoria away, Ethan following in a daze, his pickup truck a battered testament to the inferno he had just faced. His hands, still trembling slightly, gripped the steering wheel, the memory of Lily's small fingers clutching his shirt a vivid phantom sensation. But it was her words, those devastatingly innocent words, that echoed in the cavern of his mind, rattling the foundations of his carefully constructed grief. "Are you Papa, Ethan? Mama used to sing me that song you just hummed." And the wooden bird, clutched tight in her small hand, an identical replica of the one he had carved for Sarah. Two singular, impossible details that had stopped his heart, leaving him breathless in the aftermath of the actual flames. Lily, miraculously, had suffered only minor burns and smoke inhalation. She was resting now, sedated, a small, fragile figure tucked into a hospital bed, an IV drip a stark contrast to her vibrant blue eyes. Victoria Vance, after the initial torrent of maternal panic, had recomposed herself with the efficiency of a CEO accustomed to crisis management. The impeccably tailored suit was rumpled, her hair slightly disheveled, but the formidable corporate armor was back in place, her expression carefully neutral, betraying nothing of the raw emotion that had just consumed her. She stood across from Ethan in a private waiting room, the air thick with unspoken questions, heavy with the weight of years of lies and secrets Ethan didn't even know existed. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on their faces, illuminating the lines of exhaustion and the shadows of unanswered mysteries. Ethan felt like he was caught in a nightmare, one that blended the visceral horror of the accident with the surreal, dreamlike quality of Lily's words. He was bone-tired, his muscles aching from the exertion, his throat raw from the smoke. But physical discomfort was secondary to the turmoil raging within him. 8 years. 8 years of believing Sarah was gone, swallowed by a tragic car crash. 8 years of raising Leo with the ghost of his mother lingering in every corner of their small home. And now this child, this living echo of Sarah, had emerged from the flames, carrying fragments of their most intimate private memories. It was too much. His voice, when he finally found it, was rough, thick with unshed tears, and a terrifying mix of hope and dread. "The lullaby," he began, his gaze piercing, unwavering, fixed on Victoria. "And the bird. Where did she get them? How does she know about them?" Victoria's composed facade flickered, a momentary tremor in her jaw, a slight shift in her posture. She sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice measured, almost clinical, as if addressing a difficult shareholder. "Perhaps we should wait until you've rested, until things are clearer." "I clearer?" Ethan scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping him. "There's nothing clear about any of this. My wife died 8 years ago in a car accident. You have her daughter in there. Her daughter, who knows a song only Sarah and I ever shared, and a bird that was meant only for us. Nothing will be clearer until you tell me what's going on, Ms. Vance. Tell me everything." His raw desperation bled through his words, stripping away any pretense of politeness or patience. He wasn't a construction worker anymore. He was a man on the precipice of losing his sanity, demanding answers from the woman who held the key. Victoria's gaze hardened for a moment, a flash of something unreadable in her cool eyes, before softening, morphing into a look of profound sorrow. The CEO was gone, replaced by a woman burdened by a secret. She ran a hand through her hair, finally letting her guard down, if only partially. "All right," she conceded, her voice barely a whisper. "So you have a right to know, but it's not an easy story, Mr. Miller, not at all." She gestured to the two hard plastic chairs in the small waiting room. Ethan sank into one, feeling the cold plastic against his sweat-stained shirt, every nerve ending tingling with anticipation and dread. Victoria began, her narrative unfolding slowly, carefully, like a tragedy deliberately constructed to avoid further pain. "Sarah, your wife, she didn't die in the car accident you were told about." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow, stealing his breath. The air in the room seemed to condense, growing heavy, stifling. He clenched his fists, knuckles white, fighting the urge to shout, to scream, to demand she retract the monstrous lie. But she continued, her voice gaining a quiet, insistent momentum. That was a fabricated story, Mr. Miller, a desperate attempt to give you closure after the true horror. Ethan could only stare, his mind reeling. Fabricated. His entire world, built on the bedrock of that tragedy, now crumbled, revealing nothing but quicksand beneath. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the room itself were spinning. What true horror? He managed, his voice a dry, rasping sound. Victoria looked away for a moment, her gaze fixed on the sterile white wall, as if seeking strength from its blankness. "Sarah, she left you, Ethan, months before the date of the supposed accident. There was a misunderstanding, a fight, fueled by grief and unspoken anxieties after the miscarriage. The miscarriage, another wound, one he thought had scarred over, now ripped open with brutal force. They had lost their first baby, a boy, 6 months into the pregnancy. The grief had been a gaping chasm between them, a silent, unacknowledged wedge. He remembered the arguments, sharp and hurtful, born of unspoken pain, and the growing distance that had festered between them. He had blamed himself, blamed his inability to comfort her, to pull her from the darkness. He thought they had been working through it, slowly, painfully, but he hadn't known she had truly left. He thought she had died. His heart twisted, a fresh, agonizing pain compounding the old. "She was pregnant again, Ethan," Victoria continued, her voice softer now, tinged with a deep sadness. "But she hadn't told you. She was fearful of your reaction, perhaps, or her own. She was struggling. And she believed that if she told you, it would only add to the pressure, the pain. She wanted to figure things out for herself, away from the weight of everything." Victoria paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle, to sink into Ethan's consciousness. It was a partial truth laced with carefully omitted details, but it was enough to shatter his world anew. "She died giving birth to Lily," Victoria finally stated, the words flat, devoid of emotion yet heavy with profound tragedy, "in a small remote town in Oregon, far from anyone she knew. Alone. Alone." The word resonated in Ethan's heart, a chilling echo of his own desolate grief. Sarah, his vibrant, loving Sarah, had died alone, giving birth to their daughter, while he mourned her in a different, false reality. The injustice of it, the profound cruelty of it, was almost unbearable. He could picture it, the quiet despair, the fear, the struggle of his wife, facing the most profound moment of creation and loss, without him. The tears he had been fighting back now threatened to spill, a fresh wave of agony washing over him. I found her," Victoria continued, a flicker of something raw in her eyes. "Too late. After everything was over. And there was Lily, a tiny, fragile baby. Her mother gone, her father absent. Believing you were lost to grief, possibly unfit to raise a child on your own, or simply wanting to spare you the devastating truth that Sarah had died alone, having left you, I made a decision, Ethan, a terrible, agonizing decision, but one I believed was right." Ethan leaned forward, his hands clutching the arms of the chair, his breath held captive in his chest. "What decision?" he rasped, already knowing, already dreading the answer. "I took Lily," Victoria confessed, her voice thick with a mix of guilt and weary resolve. "I raised her as my own daughter. I meticulously created a new life for her, severing all ties to your past, to Sarah's past. I believed it was for the best, to protect you both." She paused, her eyes meeting his, a silent plea for understanding, for forgiveness. The lullaby, the wooden bird, these were fragments of Sarah's last moments, her legacy to her daughter. Things I collected, kept safe. She had them with her. They were passed on by me to Lily, as a way to keep a piece of Sarah alive for her, without the complications. Ethan felt the world tilt violently on its axis, a complete and utter upheaval of everything he thought he knew. The crushing grief for Sarah, the years of believing her tragically lost, were now compounded by the agonizing revelation of Lily, a daughter he never knew existed, a living echo of the woman he'd loved more than life itself. The joy, pure and unadulterated, of discovering he had another child, a daughter, wrestled brutally with the renewed anguish of Sarah's true, lonely demise. It was a maelstrom of emotions, a violent tempest threatening to drown him. He had been denied not only his wife's true final moments, but also the first 7 years of his daughter's life, 7 years he could never get back, 7 years of lullabies he didn't sing, of scraped knees he didn't kiss, of first words he didn't hear. "My God," he whispered, the words barely audible, his voice choked with emotion. "My God, Sarah and Lily." He closed his eyes, squeezing them shut, trying to process the enormity of it all. It was too much. The betrayal, the sacrifice, the profound love and the devastating loss, all intertwined in a narrative so complex, so heartbreaking, he could barely comprehend it. Victoria, now stripped of her corporate armor, looked vulnerable, almost fragile. Her deception, he realized, was born not of malice, but from a desperate, if misguided love for Sarah and for Lily. But something was still missing, a crucial piece that refused to click into place. Why Victoria? Why her of all people to be the one to find Sarah, to take in Lily? She was a CEO, a powerful woman, seemingly unrelated to his simple life with Sarah. It felt too coincidental, too neat. He opened his eyes, searching Victoria's face for any telltale sign, any flicker of hesitation that might betray a deeper truth. Her story, while devastating, felt incomplete. He believed the part about Sarah leaving, the miscarriage, the lonely death in Oregon, the lullaby and the bird as Sarah's final gifts. That much resonated with a sickening truth in his gut, a validation of years of unaddressed marital strain. But Victoria's role as a mere Good Samaritan felt thin, stretched. How had she known to find Sarah? How had she taken custody so seamlessly? "And you just found her?" Ethan asked, his voice still hoarse, but with a new edge of suspicion, a sliver of doubt piercing through the fog of his grief. "You just happened to be there in a remote town to find Sarah after she died and took her baby." Victoria flinched, her gaze darting away for a split second before meeting his again, her eyes guarded. "It's complicated," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Sarah was a very private person, especially after the miscarriage. She retreated. I had connections. I was able to track her eventually. When I found her, it was too late." The explanation felt rehearsed, too smooth yet riddled with evasions. Connections? What kind of connections? It wasn't a denial, but it wasn't a full explanation either. It left a bitter taste in Ethan's mouth. He pressed further. "What about Leo, my son? How could you just erase me from Lily's life without even considering that I had another child, a family that would have welcomed her?" The accusation hung heavy in the air, a testament to the profound loss he had endured. Victoria sighed, a sound of deep remorse. "I know, Ethan, I know it was a terrible mistake, but at the time your grief was so absolute. I saw a man consumed by sorrow, barely holding on. And I saw a tiny, vulnerable baby who needed stability, a clean slate. I made a choice, a desperate one, to protect her, to protect you in a way from more pain, more complication. I knew it was wrong to keep her from you, every single day, but I justified it, telling myself it was temporary, that one day when you were stronger, I would find a way to tell you. But the years, they just kept passing." Her explanation, steeped in genuine regret, felt more convincing, more human than her previous guarded statements. Yet, the initial act of deception, The sheer magnitude of it continued to gnaw at him. He looked around the sterile waiting room, the world a blur of white walls and hushed whispers. 7 years. Lily was 7 years old. 7 years he had unknowingly mourned a ghost, while his daughter grew up, unaware of her true father. 7 years Victoria Vance had lived this monumental lie, raising his child. The thought was staggering, impossible to fully grasp. He had to see Lily again. He had to hold her, to connect with the living proof of Sarah. "I need to see her," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "Now, my daughter, my biological daughter." The words felt strange, foreign on his tongue, yet profoundly right. Victoria nodded slowly, a trace of surrender in her eyes. "Of course. She's stable. They've given her something to help her sleep, but you can sit with her. Just please be gentle. She's been through a tremendous ordeal." She led him down a quiet corridor, past nurses and hushed medical staff, to a private room. Inside, Lily lay curled under a thin hospital blanket, her small face peaceful in slumber, though a faint smudge of soot still clung to her cheek. Her breathing was even, shallow. Ethan approached the bed, his heart aching with a tenderness so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. He reached out a trembling hand, tracing the outline of her small face, the curve of her cheek. She was so small, so utterly innocent, and she was his daughter, the living legacy of Sarah. He leaned closer, a wave of profound love washing over him, so powerful it was almost painful. He hummed softly, instinctively, the same lullaby he had hummed in the burning car, the one Sarah had created for them, a secret melody now shared with a new generation. Lily stirred slightly, a soft, contented sigh escaping her lips, and in that moment, Ethan knew. He knew that despite the lies, despite the years lost, despite the agony of the truth, this was a beginning, a new, complicated, profoundly challenging beginning. He spent what felt like hours by her bedside, watching her sleep, absorbing every detail of her face. He saw Sarah in the slight curve of her nose, in the delicate line of her jaw, and those eyes, even closed, he knew they were Sarah's vivid blue, a color he had loved, lost and now found again. The sterile hospital room became a sanctuary, a quiet space where the fragments of his shattered past began to coalesce, painfully, into a new, bewildering future. He was a father again, not just to Leo, but to this miracle child. And this powerful, enigmatic woman, Victoria Vance, who had held such a monumental secret, was now inextricably linked to his life. He looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze across the room. She was watching him, a silent observer to his raw emotion. There was regret in her eyes, yes, but also a fierce, protective love for Lily. The complex dance of their lives had just begun, a delicate negotiation between betrayal and desperate love, truth and carefully constructed lies. Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty: his life would never be the same. The flames that had nearly consumed Lily had instead forged a new path, burning away the illusions of his past, revealing a truth more devastating and more hopeful than he could ever have imagined. The journey ahead was unclear, shrouded in questions, but one thing was undeniably clear. He had a daughter, a piece of Sarah he hadn't known was still alive, and he would fight for her, for them, with every fiber of his being. The subtle clues, the inconsistencies in Victoria's story, the pieces that didn't quite fit, they were still there, gnawing at the edges of his mind. But for now, they receded into the background, overshadowed by the overwhelming presence of his sleeping daughter. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of raw exposed emotion and bewildering logistics. The hospital room, once a sanctuary for Ethan, quickly became a battleground of hushed negotiations. DNA tests were ordered, an inevitable formality to confirm what Lily's eyes and the lullaby had already screamed at Ethan's heart. Legal consultations followed, a parade of sharp-suited lawyers from both sides, their sterile language attempting to dissect and reassemble a family torn apart by years of deceit. But beneath the bureaucratic surface, the true work lay in the raw, vulnerable conversations that stretched late into the nights, fueled by stale hospital coffee and a desperate need for understanding. Ethan's joy at discovering Lily was his daughter was inextricably linked with the renewed agony of Sarah's true fate. The news that his beloved wife had not died in a sudden, tragic accident, but had left him, battled silently with an unspoken pregnancy, and then died alone, giving birth to their child in a remote Oregon town, was a wound that reopened every single time he looked at Lily. He felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the 7 years he had missed, but for the peaceful closure he had believed he had. His grief, once a quiet companion, had transformed into a raging inferno, consuming him with questions and what-ifs. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a fragile new hope began to bloom. Leo, Ethan's 10-year-old son, was the unexpected beacon of uncomplicated love. When Ethan brought him to the hospital, bracing himself for confusion, jealousy, or even anger, Leo had surprised them all. At first he was just confused, his young mind struggling to grasp the sudden appearance of a sister he never knew he had. "Another sister, Dad?" he had asked, his brow furrowed, as if Ethan had merely adopted a stray kitten. But when he saw Lily, small and vulnerable in her hospital bed, a fierce protective instinct ignited within him. He accepted Lily with the uncomplicated love only a child could offer, reaching out to hold her hand, whispering promises of games and adventures. "She's pretty, Dad," he had declared, his eyes shining, already weaving dreams of a shared future. It was a remarkable moment, a balm on Ethan's raw nerves, a testament to the innocence that could still exist amidst adult complexities. Victoria, the formidable CEO, found herself navigating a new kind of boardroom, one where spreadsheets meant nothing and emotional honesty was the only currency. The initial tension between her and Ethan was immense, a palpable barrier of betrayal and silence separating them. Each conversation felt like walking through a minefield, one wrong word threatening to detonate years of pent-up resentment. Ethan struggled to reconcile the grieving sister who had protected Lily with the woman who had stolen 7 years of his daughter's life. He saw the genuine remorse in Victoria's eyes, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was looking, the faint tremor in her voice when she spoke of Sarah. But the scale of her deception, however well-intentioned, was almost impossible to forgive. "Why didn't you ever tell me, Victoria?" he asked one evening, his voice heavy with the weight of years, as they sat in Lily's hospital room, the soft glow of the nightlight illuminating their weary faces. Lily was asleep, a peaceful presence between them. "Even after a year, 2 years, 5, when I was stronger, as you said, why not then?" Victoria looked away, her gaze fixed on Lily's small, sleeping form. "Fear, Ethan," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Pure, unadulterated fear. At first I was terrified of what it would do to you, to shatter your fragile peace. Then as Lily grew, I was terrified of what it would do to her, to suddenly introduce a new father, a new family, a past she knew nothing about. I rationalized. I told myself that you had Leo, that you were moving on, and Lily was thriving with me. I convinced myself that the damage would be greater if I revealed the truth, and every year that passed, the secret grew heavier, more impossible to reveal. I was trapped, Ethan, trapped by my own choices, by my misguided love." Her words, while not entirely absolving her, chipped away at Ethan's anger, revealing a deeper understanding beneath. He could see the years of torment in her eyes, the burden she had carried alone. He knew what it was like to be trapped by grief, by choices made in desperation. He could also see the fierce, undeniable, pure connection between him and Lily, a powerful force that transcended any lies or years. Lily, even in her sleep, would instinctively reach for his hand if he sat too close. Her small face, so often shadowed by the trauma of the accident, would soften when she heard his voice. She was drawn to him, a biological imperative that was stronger than any fabricated narrative. They began a halting, difficult negotiation, not over contracts or assets, but over family, over the remnants of Sarah's life and over Lily's future. The initial legal battles, while necessary, quickly became secondary to the emotional landscape they were navigating. The lawyers were there to protect assets and establish legal rights, but Ethan and Victoria were fighting for something far more precious, the fragile, emerging family unit. The idea of immediately ripping Lily from Victoria's care, from the only mother she had ever known, felt cruel and unsustainable, especially after the trauma she had just endured. Yet, the thought of being separated from his daughter, after just finding her, was an unbearable torment. "I want to be her father, Victoria," Ethan stated clearly during one of their fraught discussions, his voice firm. "Not just a biological donor, her father. She deserves to know who I am, who Sarah was, where she comes from, and I deserve to raise my daughter." Victoria nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I understand that, Ethan. Believe me. And I will not stand in the way of her knowing you, of her building a relationship with her biological father and her brother. But you must understand, I am her mother. I have raised her for 7 years. She is my daughter in every way that matters to her right now. We need to find a way to share her, to co-parent, for her sake." The concept of co-parenting with the woman who had kept his daughter a secret for 7 years was a bitter pill to swallow. It went against every instinct, every raw nerve ending still smarting from the betrayal. But he looked at Lily, whose small life had already been disrupted so profoundly, and he knew Victoria was right. Lily needed stability, gentleness, and above all, love, not another battle. Over the next few weeks, as Lily recovered, the hospital became their reluctant, neutral ground. Victoria, despite her demanding schedule as a CEO, made herself present, spending every spare moment by Lily's side, often running her multi-billion-dollar company from a laptop in the waiting room. Ethan, meanwhile, took time off from work, his foreman surprisingly understanding, given the incredible circumstances that had gone viral. News channels, however briefly, had reported on the single dad hero who had saved a CEO's daughter from a burning car. They had no idea the true story behind the headlines, the seismic shift that had occurred in that one moment of pure, desperate heroism. Leo visited regularly, bringing Lily drawings and small, carefully selected toys from his own collection. He would tell her stories about school, about his friends, about their dog, Rusty, gently integrating her into the fabric of his world. Lily, still shy and recovering, would listen intently, her blue eyes wide, a faint smile playing on her lips. Ethan watched these interactions, his heart swelling with a bittersweet mixture of pain and profound gratitude. Leo was a natural big brother, bridging the gap that Victoria's deception had created. The legal teams, after weeks of intense back and forth, finally brokered a temporary, unusual agreement. Lily would remain primarily with Victoria, in the familiar stability of her home for the immediate future, given her recovery and her deep attachment to Victoria. But Ethan would have extensive visitation, including overnight stays, and a clear path towards increased involvement and eventually shared custody. Both parents would undergo family counseling, a condition insisted upon by Ethan's lawyer, to help navigate the emotional complexities and build a functional, if unconventional, co-parenting relationship. It was not an immediate fairy tale ending, far from it. It was a fragile truce, a temporary ceasefire in a war that had yet to be fully fought. Ethan moved into a small rented apartment closer to Victoria's affluent neighborhood, sacrificing the comfort of his familiar home to be nearer to Lily. He wanted to be an active, daily presence in her life, not just a weekend visitor. He started looking for new construction jobs in the area, willing to rebuild his entire life to be present for his daughter. Leo, ever adaptable, understood the need for their temporary move, though he missed his old friends and the familiar comfort of their shared history. He saw the quiet determination in his father's eyes, a fire that had been rekindled, and he trusted it. The first few days of Lily's discharge from the hospital were an exercise in carefully managed emotions. Victoria's sprawling, meticulously organized mansion felt alien to Ethan, a stark contrast to his modest, lived-in home. He felt like an intruder, a stark reminder of the two vastly different worlds their daughter inhabited. But when Lily, still a little unsteady on her feet, reached for his hand the moment she saw him, the unspoken bond between them silenced all other anxieties. He read to her, he played quiet games, he simply sat beside her, letting his presence be a steady, reassuring force. He hummed the lullaby, and her eyes would flutter closed, a soft smile gracing her lips as if it were the most natural sound in the world. He learned about her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear named Mr. Snuggles, about her love for drawing, and her surprising knowledge of dinosaurs. He saw Sarah in her mischievous grin, in the way she tilted her head when she was curious. It was a dizzying, beautiful, heartbreaking rediscovery, a reclaiming of a piece of his soul he thought was lost forever. Victoria, for her part, watched these interactions with a mixture of quiet sadness and profound relief. The sight of Lily bonding with her biological father, with the man Sarah had loved, seemed to unburden her, to lift a small part of the immense weight she had carried. She began to share small anecdotes about Sarah's pregnancy, about Lily's early babyhood, filling in the blanks of Ethan's missing years, offering him precious glimpses into the life he had been denied. It was a tentative truce, a fragile bridge being built, one painful, honest brick at a time. Their future stretched out before them, a complicated, fragile tapestry woven from tragedy, lies, and an unexpected, fiery rescue. There was no simple resolution, no easy path forward. Ethan, the single dad who had broken through the flames, now faced a different kind of fire, the arduous yet profoundly beautiful task of building a new family, confronting buried truths, and learning to love a daughter he'd almost lost before he even knew he had her. Lily, the 7-year-old, the innocent catalyst, was the living promise that even from the ashes of the past, a new, albeit scarred, family could rise. The fight for understanding, for forgiveness, and for a shared future had only just begun. The scars of the past remained, but the possibility of a profound, enduring connection, one forged in fire and grief, was finally within reach. Ethan knew it would be a long, challenging road, but as he watched Lily fall asleep, her small hand nestled in his, he knew it was a journey he was ready to take. He would be her father, in every sense of the word, and no secret, no deception could ever change that fundamental truth. The whispers of the past would still linger, but the promise of the future, embodied in Lily's innocent face, burned brighter than any flame. The legal battles continued in earnest, a grueling dance of motions and counter-motions, as Ethan fought for his parental rights. While the temporary agreement provided some immediate solace, it was clear that Victoria's powerful legal team, accustomed to protecting a multi-billion-dollar empire, was prepared for a protracted fight. Their goal was to maintain Lily's stability within Victoria's established home, arguing that a sudden disruption would be detrimental to a child who had already experienced significant trauma and loss. Ethan, represented by a passionate but comparatively less resourced lawyer, argued for the fundamental right of a biological father to raise his daughter, emphasizing the emotional bond that had already ignited between them. The family counseling sessions became both a crucible and a fragile bridge between Ethan and Victoria. Dr. Eleanor Reed, a seasoned therapist with kind eyes and an unshakable demeanor, guided them through the minefield of their shared past. In these sessions, the full scope of Sarah's desperation and Victoria's misguided protection slowly unraveled. Victoria revealed more details of Sarah's final months, her sister's increasing isolation, her fierce determination to handle her second pregnancy alone after the trauma of the first miscarriage, and her fear of burdening Ethan, who was already struggling with his own grief and the responsibility of raising Leo. Sarah, it turned out, had moved to the remote Oregon town not just to be alone, but to try and find a new beginning, a clean slate, before deciding how or when to re-enter Ethan's life with a new baby. She never got the chance. Victoria confessed that her initial decision to conceal Lily's true parentage was born from a cocktail of overwhelming grief, fierce sibling loyalty, and a genuine, albeit misguided, belief that she was protecting everyone. She saw Ethan, a struggling construction worker, already burdened by a young son and a heavy heart, and genuinely believed he couldn't handle another devastating truth, let alone a newborn baby. "I saw your pain, Ethan," she admitted one afternoon in Dr. Reed's office, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw how much you struggled after Sarah's death. I truly believed I was saving you from more agony. And Lily, she needed stability, a mother, and I was there." Ethan, still reeling from the layers of deception, struggled to fully process Victoria's justifications. He understood grief intimately, but to deny him his daughter for 7 years, that was a betrayal that cut to the bone. "You took my child, Victoria," he stated, his voice devoid of anger, but laced with a profound, aching sorrow. "You took 7 years of her life from me, 7 years I can never get back. How do you justify that?" "I don't, Ethan," Victoria responded, her voice trembling. "Not fully. I justified it to myself then, out of desperation, but I know now the magnitude of what I did. I can only beg for your understanding and for a chance to make amends, for Lily's sake and for Sarah's memory." The sincerity in her eyes was undeniable, yet the scars remained, deep and painful. Meanwhile, Lily, recovering quickly from her physical injuries, began to navigate her new, bifurcated reality. Her 7-year-old mind was surprisingly resilient, yet also deeply observant. She adored her mama Victoria, the constant loving presence in her life, But she was also undeniably captivated by Ethan, the Papa Ethan who hummed Sarah's lullaby, who smelled of wood and fresh air, and whose hands, though calloused, were remarkably gentle. She spent increasing amounts of time with Ethan and Leo, slowly adjusting to the rhythm of their lives. Leo, true to his initial embrace, quickly became Lily's steadfast protector and confidant. He taught her how to build elaborate forts out of blankets, how to spot constellations in the night sky, and the best way to sneak cookies from the kitchen. Their bond grew organically, powerfully, a natural connection that transcended the complicated adult narrative. Lily, once a quiet and somewhat reserved child, began to blossom, her laughter echoing through Ethan's small apartment during their visits. She would often draw pictures of her two families, one with Mama Victoria in a big grand house, and another with Papa Ethan and Leo in a cozier, slightly messy one, the two worlds slowly merging in her innocent artistic expression. The moment, the profound, heart-stopping moment described in the title, loomed closer, its invisible threads weaving through their lives, drawing them towards a revelation far more devastating than any they had yet confronted. The lullaby and the wooden bird had been the initial triggers, the subtle clues, but they were only echoes of a deeper, more profound connection that Lily carried, one that would soon shatter Ethan's reality once more. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost 2 months after the accident, Ethan took Lily and Leo to a local park. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves, and the sun cast long, golden shadows across the playground. Leo, ever energetic, raced ahead to the swings, while Lily, holding Ethan's hand, walked a little slower, her blue eyes taking in the vibrant colors of the season. "Papa Ethan," she began, her small voice soft, almost hesitant. "Mama Victoria says my first mommy, she was a very kind lady, and that she loved me very much." Ethan knelt, meeting her gaze, his heart aching with a familiar tenderness. "She was, sweetie. She was the kindest person I ever knew, and she loved you more than words can say." He struggled to keep his voice steady, the pain of Sarah's lonely death still raw. Lily nodded, absorbing his words, then reached into the pocket of her small jacket. She pulled out the hand-carved wooden bird, the same one she'd clutched in the burning car, its robin's egg-blue wings now a familiar sight to Ethan. "Mama Victoria told me my first mommy carved this for me," she said, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of the bird's wings. "But it feels like it's always been with me, like I remember it from before." Ethan's breath hitched. Victoria had told him Sarah had it with her, that it was a legacy, but Sarah, in her remote Oregon town alone, giving birth, had she truly carved it then? It didn't quite fit. Sarah's hands, while artistic, had been weak in her final months. And the bird, it was so intricately made, a testament to hours of careful work. He remembered carving the original for Sarah on their first anniversary, a clumsy, heartfelt tribute. This one was far more refined, and Victoria had said Sarah had it, not made it. The tiny inconsistency, a splinter in his mind, began to grow. "Your Mama Victoria has the original one, honey," Ethan explained gently, trying to reconcile the conflicting narratives. "The one I carved for your first mommy. This one, it's a replica. She must have had someone make it for you." Lily shook her head, her blue eyes wide, a strange certainty in her innocent gaze. "No, Papa Ethan. Mama Victoria said my first mommy made this one for me. She told me she used to carve it for me while she hummed the song. And she said my first mommy looked just like her with blue eyes like mine. But my first mommy looked like you, Papa Ethan." Her small hand reached up, touching his cheek, then pointing to the faint scars on his arm from the fire. "And she had these on her arm too, from when she saved someone," Mama Victoria said. Ethan froze, every muscle in his body rigid. The blood drained from his face, leaving him cold and clammy despite the crisp autumn air. The sound of Leo's joyful shouts from the swings faded into a dull roar in his ears. What she said after stopped his heart. Lily's words were a direct contradiction to everything Victoria had told him, to everything he believed about Sarah's death. "My first mommy looked just like her with blue eyes like mine, but my first mommy looked like you, Papa Ethan. And she had these on her arm too, from when she saved someone," Mama Victoria said. The world, as Ethan knew it, crumbled, not gently, but with the brutal force of an earthquake. The first mommy, the scars on her arm, just like his. The way Lily spoke of Victoria and her first mommy as separate entities, yet with conflicting details given by Victoria herself. It was as if Lily's mind, processing fragmented memories and narratives, was inadvertently exposing a deeper, darker lie. Victoria had said Sarah had died alone in Oregon, that she had found her. But if Sarah had scars like his from saving someone, why would Victoria omit that? Why would she make it sound like Sarah died a simple, lonely death, and the first mommy looking like Victoria, but also like him? It didn't make sense. Not unless... A horrifying, impossible thought began to bloom in Ethan's mind, cold and sharp. A thought so devastating, so utterly unthinkable, it threatened to tear him apart. It wasn't just Sarah's death that had been misrepresented. It wasn't just his 7 years with Lily that had been stolen. It was the very identity of Lily's first mommy. He remembered the look in Victoria's eyes when he'd pressed her about how she found Sarah. The flicker of evasion, the convenient vagueness. I had connections. It's complicated. He gripped Lily's small hand, his own trembling violently. Lily, he asked, his voice a strained whisper, barely audible. Who told you your first mommy made this bird for you? Lily looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and innocent, utterly unaware of the chasm she had just opened. Mama Victoria, she replied simply. She always said it was a gift from my first mommy, who loved to carve and sing the bird song. Ethan felt a cold dread seep into his bones, chilling him to the core. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Victoria had told him Sarah had the bird. Lily said Victoria told her Sarah made it, and Lily's first mommy had scars from saving someone, just like Victoria herself had mentioned Ethan's scars, and those striking blue eyes, so like Sarah's, yet also so like Victoria's. His heart didn't just stop, it imploded. It was not Sarah, it was Victoria. Victoria was Lily's biological mother, and Sarah had been a stand-in, a cover story, a devastatingly convenient lie to hide a far more complex and perhaps even more tragic truth. The notion hit him with the force of a 1,000-ton weight. He remembered Victoria's fierce protectiveness of Lily, her desperation to keep them together, her admission of misguided love. But it wasn't just love for her sister and niece. It was a primal, maternal love. And Sarah, where did that leave Sarah? If Victoria was Lily's mother, then Sarah hadn't died giving birth. She hadn't even been pregnant with Lily. The entire narrative Victoria had spun, the very foundation of Ethan's renewed grief and complicated hope, was built on a monumental lie. He stood up abruptly, pulling Lily gently to her feet, his mind racing, 1,000 fragmented thoughts colliding. The betrayal felt absolute, complete. Victoria had not just kept his daughter from him. She had twisted Sarah's memory into a convenient shield for her own secret. She had allowed him to grieve for Sarah in a new, agonizing way, while concealing the true identity of Lily's mother. The pain of Sarah's actual death, shrouded in whatever true circumstances existed, was now amplified by this cruel manipulation. He looked at Lily, her small, innocent face upturned, her eyes filled with trust. He couldn't let her see the utter devastation in his own. He forced a strained smile, his throat tight. "Come on, sweetie," he said, his voice raspy. "Let's go find Leo. It's getting late." He walked towards the swings, his steps heavy, his mind a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and a profound, bone-deep weariness. He had saved Lily from a fire, only to find himself trapped in a different kind of inferno, one built of lies and buried truths. He needed answers. Real answers. And this time he wouldn't stop until he got them all. The thought of confronting Victoria with this new, terrible possibility made his stomach churn. The quiet, grieving sister, the remorseful guardian, that image shattered, replaced by a formidable, calculating woman who had woven a web of deceit around his entire life. He knew he couldn't keep this new, terrifying suspicion to himself. He had to confide in someone, to find solid ground amidst the shifting sands of his reality. He thought of Dr. Reed, the family therapist, her calm, perceptive gaze. She had seen through so much already. Perhaps she could help him navigate this new, treacherous landscape. But even Dr. Reed, he realized, had been working within the narrative Victoria had provided. This was a deeper, more fundamental lie, one that changed everything. The air grew colder as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The beauty of the sunset, felt like a cruel mockery of the storm raging within him. He watched Leo push Lily higher and higher on the swing, their laughter carrying on the wind, a poignant melody against the backdrop of his shattering world. He was Lily's father. That much was true, no matter who her mother was, but the identity of that mother and the sheer audacity of the deception threatened to unravel all the fragile progress they had made. The rescue from the flames was just the beginning. The true inferno had only just begun. The burning car, the smoke, the desperate swing of the axe, that was a fleeting moment of physical danger. This intricate web of lies was a slow burn, threatening to consume not just his heart, but his very understanding of truth and trust. And he was standing right in the middle of it, clutching his daughter's hand, looking into her innocent eyes, and seeing not just Sarah, but a ghost of a different, more complicated truth. The world spun around Ethan, a dizzying kaleidoscope of fragmented memories and agonizing doubts. Lily's innocent words, "My first mommy looked just like her, with blue eyes like mine. But my first mommy looked like you, Papa Ethan," had not just stopped his heart. They had ripped open a chasm beneath his feet, revealing an abyss of unimaginable betrayal. The vibrant colors of the park, the joyful shouts of Leo and Lily, blurred into an indistinguishable haze as he struggled to maintain composure, to prevent the terror from spilling out and frightening his children. He walked with heavy, leaden steps, his gaze fixed on the ground, his mind frantically sifting through every interaction, every detail of Victoria's narrative. The inconsistencies, once dismissed as minor, now screamed at him with chilling clarity. Victoria's evasiveness about how she found Sarah. Her carefully chosen words, "Sarah had the bird, not made it." The way she had spoken of Sarah's pregnancy and isolated death, a story designed to evoke pity and justify her actions, but now feeling hollow, fabricated. And the scars on Lily's first mommy's arm, similar to his own, from saving someone. Victoria herself had mentioned Ethan's scars, implying a shared heroic trait with Sarah, but it was Victoria who had also said Lily's first mommy looked just like her. The pieces didn't just fit together. They clicked with the horrifying precision of a lock falling into place. He brought Lily and Leo back to Victoria's sprawling mansion, the grand facade now seeming like a fortress built around a lie. He tried to act normal, to laugh at Leo's recount of a playground triumph, to smile at Lily's shy goodnight, but his eyes, he knew, betrayed him, darting nervously towards Victoria, who greeted them with her usual composed efficiency. She offered him a glass of water, inquired about their day, her voice smooth, her demeanor impeccable. It was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. He felt like he was observing her through a warped lens, seeing a stranger where he had believed he saw a grieving sister, a protective aunt. He declined dinner, citing exhaustion, and left Leo with Lily, promising to pick him up early the next morning. As he drove away, the familiar streets of Seattle seemed alien, distorted by the earthquake of his new suspicions. He didn't go back to his apartment. Instead, driven by an urgent, desperate need for guidance, he drove straight to Dr. Reed's office. It was late, the building dark, but he knew the therapist would understand the desperation of his call. He left a frantic, almost incoherent voicemail, begging for an emergency session for any time she could spare. He couldn't wait. The weight of this new, terrifying possibility was suffocating him. Dr. Reed, a woman of profound empathy and professional integrity, called him back within the hour. She listened patiently as Ethan, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion, recounted Lily's words, the glaring inconsistencies, the dawning, horrifying realization. He spoke of the lullaby, the bird, the scars, the conflicting descriptions of Lily's first mommy, and finally his gut-wrenching conclusion, Victoria. Victoria is Lily's biological mother, not Sarah. Sarah couldn't have been pregnant with Lily. This whole story, it's a lie, a cover-up for something else. Doctor. Reed remained silent for a long moment, allowing his frantic words to echo in the quiet of his phone. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, but tinged with a deep seriousness. Ethan, this is a monumental revelation, if true. It turns everything on its head. Are you absolutely certain about these details Lily provided? Yes, he insisted, his desperation palpable. Lily said, "My first mommy looked just like her, with blue eyes like mine." Then she said, But my first mommy looked like you, Papa Ethan. And the scars. Victoria mentioned scars on Sarah's arm just like mine from saving someone, but Victoria said Sarah died alone, giving birth. How could she have scars from saving someone? It makes no sense unless Victoria is the one who saved someone. Unless Victoria is the first mommy Lily remembers from before, and Sarah was just part of the story Victoria told her, blending reality with fabrication to hide the truth. Dr. Reed's intake of breath was barely audible. This would mean a far deeper, more complex web of deceit than we've been discussing. It implies that Victoria's entire narrative about Sarah's pregnancy and death might be severely altered, if not entirely false. It changes the nature of the betrayal from one of misguided protection to something far more fundamental. It's not just misguided protection, Ethan agreed, his voice trembling. It's a lie that uses Sarah's memory as a shield. It's a lie that denied me my daughter's entire life by pretending Sarah was her mother when she wasn't. He felt a surge of cold fury, sharper than any he had felt before. The previous anger at Victoria had been diluted by understanding for a sister's grief. This was pure, unadulterated outrage. They arranged an emergency session for the following morning, the first rays of dawn barely touching the horizon. Ethan spent the night in a sleepless haze, pacing his small apartment, the enormity of the potential truth threatening to crush him. He replayed every conversation with Victoria, every subtle nuance, every fleeting expression. He remembered Victoria's initial shock and panic at the accident, her fierce embrace of Lily. He remembered the striking blue eyes, so like Sarah's, yes, but also undeniably like Victoria's. He had dismissed it before, attributing the family resemblance to sisterhood. Now it felt like undeniable proof. The session with Dr. Reed was intense, stretching for 3 hours. Ethan laid out every shred of evidence, every chilling deduction. Dr. Reed listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally interjecting with a question designed to test his hypothesis, to ensure he wasn't grasping at straws in his emotional turmoil. But the more he spoke, the more solid his theory became, built on a foundation of Lily's innocent words and Victoria's calculated omissions. The most damning piece of evidence, Ethan, Dr. Reed finally concluded, her voice grave, is the combination of the scars from saving someone and Lily's statement that her first mommy looked like Victoria, but also like you. If Victoria fabricated the story of Sarah's pregnancy, and if she herself has a scar that could be interpreted as a heroic wound, it would suggest that she herself is the biological mother and the first mommy Lily subconsciously remembers. The story of Sarah's lonely death giving birth to Lily would then be a construct to hide this truth. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. But why? Why lie to that extent? Why make up Sarah's pregnancy and death when I was already grieving her real death? What could be so terrible that she had to invent that monumental lie? Dr. Reed leaned forward, her gaze sympathetic. That, Ethan, is the million-dollar question, and it's one only Victoria can answer. But if this is true, then her motivations for this level of deception would be far more complex than just misguided protection. It suggests a deep-seated fear, perhaps a profound secret about Lily's conception, or about her relationship with Sarah, that she felt compelled to hide at all costs. It means the betrayal is not just against you, but against Sarah's memory, and fundamentally, against Lily herself. The weight of it all was crushing. He felt a profound sense of anguish for Sarah, his beloved wife. Her true death, whatever the circumstances, was now tainted by Victoria's elaborate deception. He had mourned her, believed in her sacrifice, and now her very narrative had been hijacked, used as a tool to cover a deeper lie. The disrespect, the manipulation was unbearable. Dr. Reed advised him to approach Victoria with extreme caution. This is a woman who has built her life, and Lily's life, around this secret for 7 years, Ethan. She will not give it up easily. She may even deny it vehemently, to protect herself and what she perceives as Lily's stability. You need irrefutable proof, not just Lily's words, however compelling, and you need to be prepared for the fallout, which could be catastrophic for all involved, especially Lily. But what proof? The DNA test results were still pending. He needed something tangible, something Victoria couldn't deny, a memory, a document, a confession. He left Dr. Reed's office with a renewed sense of purpose, but also with a cold knot of dread in his stomach. He would confront Victoria, but he would do it on his terms, armed with a clear head and a strategy. He needed to find that one piece of evidence that would break her, that would force her to reveal the full, horrifying truth. He thought of Sarah's belongings, packed away in dusty boxes in his attic, a painful archive he rarely touched. He remembered a small box of her personal effects, unopened since her funeral. Perhaps there, amidst the remnants of her life, he might find a clue, a letter, a diary entry, anything that would either confirm Victoria's initial story or expose the deeper lie. The memory of the wooden bird, the real one he had carved for Sarah, stirred in his mind. Where was it? Victoria had said she had the original. Why? And why would Sarah have a replica, supposedly carved by her, that was of higher quality than Ethan's own original? It was another thread, leading him further down the rabbit hole. He picked up Leo from Victoria's mansion, forcing a strained politeness with her. She seemed to sense the shift in his demeanor, her cool gaze lingering on him for a beat too long. He could almost feel her antennae rising, detecting the change in the air. He needed to move carefully, precisely. Back at his apartment after Leo was asleep, Ethan went to the attic. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten memories. He rummaged through boxes, his heart pounding in his chest. Clothes, old books, photographs of him and Sarah, laughing, loving, living a life that now felt like a cruel illusion. Finally, in a small forgotten box at the very bottom, he found it. A small wooden bird, robin's egg blue, identical to Lily's but rougher, more primitive in its carving. His carving, the original, the one he had made for Sarah, and underneath it, nestled amongst a tangle of old letters and dried flowers, was a small leather-bound diary. Sarah's diary. He remembered her keeping one, filled with her elegant handwriting, her private thoughts. He had never dared to read it, respecting her privacy even in death. Now, however, the need for truth overshadowed everything else. He opened it, his fingers trembling, turning the brittle pages. He found entries from the months leading up to her supposed accident, chronicling her despair after the miscarriage, her growing distance from him, her fears. He read about her decision to leave, to find herself, to navigate her grief alone. And then he found it. An entry from 9 months before Lily's birth, a few weeks after Sarah had left him, written in a shaky hand. Victoria came to see me today. She's pregnant. It's a secret. A terrible secret. She won't tell anyone. Says she can't. But she's so scared, so alone. And she asked me if I would help her, to protect the baby, to tell everyone it was mine. A lie, a monstrous lie. But she's my sister, and she has no one else. Ethan's world fractured completely. Not just stopped, not just shattered, but splintered into a million irreparable pieces. Victoria hadn't found Sarah with Lily. Sarah had agreed to cover for Victoria's pregnancy, to pretend the baby was hers, to take the secret to her grave. He flipped frantically through the subsequent pages, desperate for more. There were entries about Sarah's fears, her moral conflict, her overwhelming love for her sister, even as she struggled with the enormity of the deception. And then, a few months later, another entry, dated just a week before her accident and Lily's birth. Victoria is due any day. We've set up the story. I'm to go to Oregon, to a remote clinic. She'll join me later. We'll say I went into labor early. No one will suspect. The baby is beautiful. So small, so perfect. Victoria is terrified. She says no one can ever know the truth, not about the father or about me pretending. She begged me, please, Sarah, for me, for the baby, lie for me. And I said yes. How can I do this to Ethan? But how can I abandon my sister? This is a burden too heavy to bear. And then the final devastating entry, a day before her supposed death, written in a barely legible scrawl. I can't do this. I can't lie to Ethan. He deserves to know. I'm going back. I'll tell him everything. Victoria's secret. My part in it. He deserves the truth about Lily. About everything. I have to go back. I have to tell him. Ethan read the words again and again until they burned into his soul. Sarah hadn't died giving birth. She had been on her way back to him, to confess, to tell him the truth about Victoria, about Lily, about everything. And then the actual car accident happened. The one he had mourned, the one he had accepted, was tragically, horrifyingly real, but its cause, its context, was now fundamentally altered. Sarah wasn't running from him. She was running to him, to set things right, and she died trying. The profound sense of grief and anguish that washed over Ethan was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was a crushing wave of sorrow for Sarah, for her immense sacrifice, for the impossible burden she had carried, and for her desperate final act of love and honesty, and a cold, righteous fury for Victoria, who had not only allowed this monstrous lie to fester for 7 years, but had actively used Sarah's memory, twisting her tragic death into a convenient cover-up. The very fire that had almost consumed Lily, the fire that had brought them together, was now burning away the last vestiges of Ethan's trust, illuminating the true, devastating inferno of Victoria's deception. What she said after had indeed stopped his heart, but what Sarah had written after had utterly, completely destroyed his world and revealed the heart-wrenching truth of his wife's final, heroic decision.